All right, good evening and welcome to Community Conversations, a panel series presented by Dorson Community Foundation. My name is Dakota Peligi, Director of Talent Hubs at Civic Lab and the host of Lumina Foundation's podcast, Today's Students, Tomorrow's Talent. I have the pleasure of serving as your moderator for today's discussion, a conversation about ensuring the success of low-income students in higher education. We're very glad you're here today. We have a really great panel lined up for you, but this evening is only going to be successful with your engagement. Please make comments, ask questions, and most importantly, make connections through the chat feature and the Q&A feature throughout our time together. We'll definitely take some of your questions as we go and save others for a Q&A session later in the evening. Today's conversation takes place during Black Lives Matter at School Week, a week where school districts, colleges, and universities and partnerships around the country join together in calls for racial justice in education. While each community is pursuing change to improve the places they call home, the movement generally advocates for ending zero-tolerance discipline, implementing restorative justice practices and policies, hiring more Black teachers, mandating Black history and ethnic studies curriculum in schools, and increasing funding for school counselors. Here in your own community, people from the public, private, and social sector are working together to address the challenges students of color and low-income students face as they navigate school, home, and eventually work. Today's conversation focuses on an important subset of your overall movement, making sure low-income students are successful in higher education. I am delighted to share the stage today with the change makers who go to work every day to make this goal a reality, to hear about the issues they see and the solutions that they've developed. And I hope you walk away with a clear understanding about how you can get involved in creating a stronger education system here in Essex County. So today we're joined by first Candace Clausen, Director of the Center for Higher Education and Career Support at the Harlem Children's Zone. As an experienced higher education administrator with a strong focus in student life, Candace does whatever it takes to help youth successfully succeed in the higher education system to become productive, self-sufficient adults. Demeen Phoenix is the assistant principal of East Orange High School. Demeen taught math in South Africa before returning home to East Orange to take his role as an assistant principal. He founded Elevated Habits, a life coaching group that helps people develop their whole self. Demeen, we're really glad that you're here with us as well. Also joining us is David Sokolow, the executive director for New Jersey's Higher Education Student Assistance Authority, HESA. With a successful career throughout higher education, including leading national bodies of work with the Center for Post-Secondary and Economic Success, prior to coming to HESA, David brings an important state policy and affordability perspective to today's conversation. And finally, we're really glad to have Natalie de Los Angeles Hodge, Deputy Director for Program Strategy and Staff Development at the City Universities of New York EDGE program, CUNY EDGE. CUNY EDGE supports students who receive public assistance and helps them graduate on time, achieve academic excellence, and find employment. As you'll see through today's conversation, Natalie's an ideal leader for this program and is very eager to share her insights with us today. Panelists, thank you all for joining us today. I know I'm really excited to bring the conversations we've been having to our full community, so thanks for your time. Conversations like this help keep the fire of change alight, and I'm really grateful to have Dorson Community Foundation at the helm leading the way. Before I turn it over to Natasha Scott, the Executive Director of Dorson, we do want to know how you heard about tonight's event. So if you can, please take a quick moment to complete the poll that should be appearing on your screen now to help us better understand where you came from, how you heard about us, and help us improve our reach. So we'll just give you a couple seconds to go ahead and complete that poll that just popped up for you. Okay, thank you. And as you wrap up that poll, I want to invite my good friend and colleague, Natasha Scott, to welcome us to today's conversation. Natasha.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining Dorson's second Community Conversations event. You could be doing anything tonight and you chose to spend even more time on Zoom with us, so I'm immensely grateful for that. When my mother, Sonia, founded Dorson back in 1992, she had a laser focus on helping support the families and youth in the inner cities of Essex County, New Jersey. Newark, East Orange, Irvington, Orange, communities filled with young people with hopes and dreams and great potential, but disparate opportunities due to systemic inequalities. Today, in 2021, Dorson maintains that singular focus. And through this community conversation series, we are leaning into this rather extraordinary time in history where the collective conscience is uniquely spotlighted on the lived experiences of low-income communities and communities of color. Through conversation, we build awareness, and through awareness, we hope to trigger action and change, both in the system at large and in the very real lives of the youth that we serve. Now, Essex County, New Jersey is a unique corner of northern New Jersey. You have the affluent communities on one end and urban inner cities on the other. And the young people in between are living very different realities when it comes to their education. Essex County is but one community, but not unlike many other that exist across America, plagued with educational disparities. Tonight, our panelists will highlight the realities faced by our most vulnerable population, which is low-income students, who are often Black, Indigenous, or students of color, and many of whom are the first in their families to pursue a post-secondary degree. The same students that we at Dorson and many other community organizations have been fighting to empower and support on their paths to adulthood. We hope these community conversations will provide you all with the knowledge and tools to continue self-education, to take action, and to support organizations and institutions working to overcome the challenges our communities face. I applaud you all for being here tonight, and I hope this panel provides you with whatever insights you need to join this movement. Thank you all.
Thanks, Natasha. And what a great way to kind of bring us into today's conversation. I really appreciate being able to work with community partnerships around the country, and working with Dorson has really been a professional highlight for me. So I know today's conversation, the second of the series, is going to be really, really great. And I encourage and I'm grateful that everyone's actually here with us, rolling up their sleeves. So, with that, Domain, I just kind of want to start out with you. You kind of have hometown privilege here. So I want to kick us off. You grew up in East Orange, somehow, some way you made your way over to South Africa where you taught math, which, by the way, I'm incredibly grateful for as someone who has a terrible math phobia. So right on to the math brain people in the world. How does it feel to have grown up in East Orange and then return back to East Orange High School as the assistant principal?
Well, thank you for that introduction, Dakota. I would say that growing up in East Orange and returning back to serving my current capacity has been, I would say the word is fulfilling. And when I think about my experience growing up in East Orange and just overall my transition to my current position to which I serve, there are 5 key points that kind of led me throughout my life, so to speak, thus far. First being understanding the importance of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? The basic essentials. And growing up in East Orange, I really understood that because my parents or my support system was really strong. I am an immigrant. I was born in South America, Guyana, and there's a certain subculture that's attached to that. Kind of like, I would say, failure is not an option, right? So that was a concept that was ingrained in me in the household. So the outside environment, the surrounding, it played a factor, but as long as I had that concept at my core, I was able to kind of take care of myself. And then returning back to this concept of hierarchy of needs, first being food and shelter, and safety, right? So those key things I received from my family, and then the last being love, right? Before you can move on to the higher levels, which is self-actualization. But I received a lot of love from my support system, and if I didn't have that, I don't think that I would have been able to navigate their environments. The second point that kind of drew me, that allowed me to transition through, some difficult situations, if I'm being quite frank, in East Orange, was understanding my narrative, right? And understanding the narrative that I wanted to reinforce for myself. I know a lot of the students that I work with, the narrative is very different. Some of their parents did not have a favorable experience with public education. And so they kind of pass that energy on to their, to their children, either consciously or subconsciously. But in my case, the narrative was constantly given to me that I came from, kings and queens, and my dad was very, academically sound. So, and just all transparency, I didn't grow up with my father, but this was the narrative that my mother was telling me often. And so for me, it was kind of like reinforcing that self-fulfilling prophecy. I definitely want to say one of the key things that I've learned throughout my experience is also the exposure, right? So my mom at a young age, she allowed me to travel to different places. Even though East Orange was my hub, she would often send me to different environments of different socioeconomic status, so I can get a clear picture as to what the world around me looked like. And there's an old saying, in order to be it, you have to see it, right? So I know if you think about being in one specific area and one environment, if I'm constantly seeing a specific type of person or a specific type of man, in my situation of who I wanted to become, just depending on who that person is, that's the images that I consume. So for me, I was grateful for that. My parents, my mom, and my support system was able to kind of give me different exposure. So those are just a few things that I've taken away.
And I have to imagine you bring a lot of that lived experience and these, I'll just call them principles for now into your work and guiding students who are also kind of on this new path. Maybe you can just bring us into that conversation about, some of the challenges that you see students in your high school facing as they're trying to make their way into higher education, as they try to reach those upper echelons of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, as you've kind of laid out for us.
Oh, certainly. One of the common denominators across my years after working with this particular age group is that they have a difficulty understanding the difference between a dream and a goal, right? So and going back to that concept of exposure, many of our students, they come in their freshman year or ninth grade, and the concept of college, right? It's mentioned to them. However, many of them don't know or are unfamiliar with the steps that are needed to actually be on that trajectory, right? So I go to this, I often have this little, when I meet with my cohort, because we govern by different cohorts. So when I meet with my cohort of students, I always talk to them about this concept of understanding the difference between a dream and a goal, right? It's awesome to dream about going to college, but how are we actually going to get you there? What colleges are you aspiring to? And every single year, that conversation dials down a little more. And so by their senior year, it's like, okay, you need to tell me what college you're going to, how you're planning on paying for it, what's your potential major, right? What potential pitfalls may come in your, so we get to dial down and have an actual benchmark, if you will, to actually put them on that trajectory. So it's not just a pipe dream, it's something that you're actually going to accomplish. And then I would say the other key areas that I'll say that a lot of our young people struggle with is this concept of self-awareness. And it kind of, when they spend too much time, focus on outside influences, they really don't see the long-term effects. And so what I try to do is try to put things in perspective by providing them with access to different, initiatives that are kind of going to keep them on track to actually receiving, obtaining that goal of attending college, and not only attending, but completing, right? So getting there and knowing what it takes to get through and receive a degree, and hopefully go on and be an asset to society.
Yeah, you've laid out, there's this whole system that needs to be able to work. There's all these steps that also need to get, figured out and work in this very delicate, sometimes precarious dance of just following through on all the steps. And then also the sense of self, it's just like these 3 S's that you've just kind of created for us. And, Candace, I saw you kind of smile when Domain started talking about some of the intricate steps. And I'm just, obviously Harlem Children's Zone set out to tackle intergenerational prosperity in a very different way. And so I was hoping you could, I'm sure a lot of what Domain already said kind of resonated with you. Maybe you could just share a little bit more about your work, the work of Harlem Children's Zone, and give us another kind of sampling of some of the challenges that you face and that your students face on a daily basis.
Yeah, so I think that low income isn't a monolith and it doesn't exist in a vacuum. And that's something that you sort of have to dismantle to understand the work. there's an association, right? When you hear low income people, you usually think communities of color, but there are low income people with college degrees, people who had a thriving business and for whatever reason life didn't go right and now they're sort of considered low income. And there are tons of systems in place that want to keep low income people around for whatever financial, political, or otherwise gain they have. So I think that you have to have that as your baseline understanding when you're approaching this work, to understand that as much good as we all do on this screen, there are people who don't want us to survive and don't want us to prosper. And so the work of the Harlem Children's Zone is sort of triaged around a lot of that, right? So we do policy work, we lobby in Albany, we want laws, we want lawmakers, we want sustainable change, so that when we are able to get a student a degree, get them a job with a sustaining family supporting wage, that there isn't a system already designed to break apart what has been achieved. So I think that is sort of I mean, there's lots of things that we do right on a daily basis, you know, kids in cribs and, you know, giving backpacks and all those things that are life-changing for families when they don't have resources. But to me, I think our best work is done in building communities at scale and then working with the systems that could potentially bring our community down to ensure that we're propped back up, essentially.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, right? Because like, again, you're totally agree. Low income is definitely not a monolith, right? And it's even hard sometimes to have conversations about this because it almost feels like we're talking about too many people all at once, and it's almost not useful. But, you know, I also appreciate the point you just kind of landed on, which is like, yeah, we do cribs and backpacks and coaching and this and that, the other, and still there's another layer of work that you have to get towards. I guess, you know, one of the things that should go one level deeper is, you know, can you talk a little bit about, you know, some of those specific kind of interventions that you've been using to help the individual student and how that pairs up to some of your broader advocacy work? So how do you prepare the individual while preparing the system to receive them?
We take a holistic approach. And so we quite literally have programs for children when they're in the womb. So we teach parents how to effectively and consciously parent their children so that they're not in the ACS cycle. They're not having social workers intervening in their families. They're not having students that are removed from the home. And then we have 2 charter schools, which sort of infuse the best of what an expensive New York City private school could afford you at the very low price of free, which is a very attractive price. But we also have after school programs that mirror a lot of the curriculum that's taught in the day program for students that choose to go to other schools. And then we have one facet of my program of my portfolio is K-12 college readiness. So what are the milestones that students are reaching in kindergarten, 3rd grade, 5th grade? We can't just use standardized testing. Standardized testing is A, not necessarily made for students of color, and B, not effective. I can't keep track of like, is it race to the top? Is no child left behind? Like, you really don't know where you are when you're dealing with standardized tests sometimes. So both in school and out of school interventions, and then stipending. So one of our philosophies is you could go get a minimum wage job, and that's going to teach you certain skills. And it may lead you to the path of being a store manager or a restaurateur or an entrepreneur one day that owns that business. But if we believe that we can teach you robotics and culinary arts and baking and sewing and cooking and whatever, but we stipend that for you, then that's a more attractive option than you going and working a minimum wage job that may not bode well for you long term. And so then once our students transition into college, then they have a college counselor that's dedicated to them. They have a career services team that's dedicated to them. We utilize all of our corporate partners to make sure that if a student says, I want to be an animator, we have someone at Pixar who can talk to you about that. So really utilizing the resources that have been donated to us or that we actively go out and seek, but taking a cradle to career pipeline is sort of some of our verbiage, because we really believe you have to surround a student from early on all the way through. And even then, that sometimes doesn't end in a college graduation, right? So you can do all of the things correctly, and even then the societal pressures of the societal whatever's going on, imposter syndrome, some of the things that our students face that sort of speak to the intersectionality of their identities and their identity as a low income person, may still not fare the way that we want to.
Yeah. So Natalie, I got to turn to you now. I mean, like, You know, we have prenatal care. We're making sure kids leave kindergarten being able to count to 100 and do all the other stuff kindergartens need to do. And we've got third grade reading, and we've got eighth grade math, and we got your SATs and your ACTs, and we've got, you know, career exposure and your stipend. So certainly all of these students must be on a complete jetway of success once they hit higher ed. Is that fair to say?
I think that's the goal, and we're far from it. Unfortunately, despite all of the efforts made from cradle to, incoming freshmen, there are still so many intricacies of the higher ed experience that students do need continuous support once they reach us. So I'm talking specifically from a CUNY Edge perspective and CUNY perspective. I work with 19 undergraduate campuses, from 2-year community colleges to 4-year schools and comprehensive schools that do a little bit of both. And we know from our students that college continues to be more difficult to navigate than they expected. I think a part of that responsibility is on professionals and also the educational institutions that are not transparent about their processes. Don't give students and families enough information to make well-informed decisions, and also act against the sense of empowerment that everyone here is trying to instill in those individuals by taking away information, transparency, and choice. That said, there are a lot of programs like CUNY Edge and other programs at CUNY that recognize the need and some of the deficits and actively work to try to fill some of those gaps by acknowledging that we need to pivot from being college-centric in the sense of focusing on the sense of elitism or on anything that's moving our focus away from students. So our programs are explicitly and intentionally student-centric.
What does that mean for you? I mean, as we hear that, sometimes it can be a buzzword in some conversations. It's like as someone who comes from philanthropy, like I can guarantee you every grant proposal that comes across my desk mentions the word equity and mentions the word student-centered. So what does that mean in the CUNY Edge context?
So in the CUNY Edge context, that means we have a heavy focus on data. So our programs are data-driven. And the most important kind of data is the one that comes directly from our students. And that allows us to respond to their specific needs in ways that are dynamic, just like they are. And so, for example, I'd say prior to COVID, CUNY had a minimum of 25,000 students who were receiving some type of public assistance. Any of those students could opt into CUNY Edge. And the reason for that is because CUNY Edge's mission is to support students who are receiving public assistance to graduate on time, to succeed academically, and to find employment, as you said. And so those major buckets really on a day-to-day basis mean so many different things for our students, from which classes you select to your relationship with your teacher, whether or not you can actually get the information that you need from the financial aid office. And so our goal is a student-centric model, meaning that we find ways to connect with students where they are, whether it's text, phone, video, email. If you need something, students are building a rapport with our teams on the 19 campuses to understand that if they have a challenge, our job is to make sure that we remove the red tape for them, so that it becomes more about access for them to tap into their resources as opposed to still trying to figure it out on their own.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the role of, navigators as coaches, counselors, whatever word you want to put there, is really clear. I mean, just even hearing from the three of you, like at all phases, there is someone there who is helping an individual, particularly if they happen to be in your programs. And I think we can talk a little bit later about some of the structural things that we might be able to put into place. So it doesn't matter if you get into a program, this is just the way the system works. But before we get there, David, I do want to turn to you because, we're talking about low-income student success. The word income is in it. And, my simpleton brain at least is like, oh, well, we should just make college like, I don't know, affordable, free, so is this something that we can just like, is the answer simply free college, more money into the system? Can you bring us into the financial aid element of this and educate my simpleton brain a bit more?
Well, I mean, I think thank you very much for this tremendous discussion. And when I hear about people working directly with students thinking about what we're trying to do of make college more affordable, and in many cases try to make it free. One of the barriers is helping people understand this, and the point about all the different steps and all the hurdles and the lack of information and professionals hiding the ball that Natalie just talked about of not being transparent. We're out to try to fix that. And so one of the reasons why we talk about making college free, Governor Murphy 3 years ago started a program that my agency runs called the Community College Opportunity Grant, grants to students to make up the difference between all the other aid they get and the cost of tuition at community colleges in New Jersey for families with adjusted incomes up to $65,000. So that's low income and moderate income families. The reality is, for many of those students, college was probably already going to be tuition free with other programs, but people don't know that. And so the people we're concerned about are the ones who are not even applying. They're not filling out a financial aid application, a FAFSA. They're not thinking that college is affordable. And that's why all the conversation about free college is so relevant, because you've got to cut through the clutter of, well, it might be free, but only if you go through 17 different hurdles, and then you'll find out the price. This is the only major financial decision in which the price is not up front. Even cars where there's that fake price, that sticker price of a manufacturer's suggested retail price, that number is close to what you'll end up paying. You should pay less than that. But college can be any number of multiples difference from what the number on the sticker price is, and no one knows that. So free college, as a lot of people are talking about, and as we have made happen again for community college now in New Jersey, for many people, makes a real difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And you hit on another kind of key word here, which last conversation that we had, a lot of people in the Q&A function were asking us about FAFSA, family members trying to figure it out. So I do want to make sure we spend just a bit of time here. So you mentioned the free application for student aid, FAFSA, and how important it is that people fill that out. And in particular, there's one estimate I'm just looking at here that we had fewer low-income students returning to college this academic year during the pandemic, about 250,000 fewer students renewed their FAFSA application. So, David, starting with you, one, can you talk to us a little bit about, there's always that notion of the FAFSA is hard, it's complex, do I have my tax information? I myself was like a homeless student, and I had to deal with all these people being like, oh, you need your parents. And I was like, hey, I don't have parents. So that was frustrating. So talk to us a little bit about some of the kind of future of where FAFSA is going and how we're making it easier. But then also, if you could kind of bring in, how do you, what do stakeholders need to do to help encourage people to make sure they're getting all the support they need from our FAFSA system?
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And, I'll start with today and then talk about the future. Today, the FAFSA is a form that is available online. HESA runs hundreds of workshops a year. We do a lot in partnership with community-based organizations all over New Jersey to try to help families. Literally, it was easier before COVID because you could literally look over their shoulder at a computer lab and help them walk through the 45 minutes or so it takes most families to fill out this form. It is complex. The reason why there's a FAFSA is because we don't have enough money to simply pay for college for everyone, and so it's need-based aid, and so we're looking to support those people with need. And so it asks information about the student's income, the family's income, the parent's income in the case of dependent students. There is this whole distinction you just made about independent versus dependent students. All of that is baked into the FAFSA. It has gotten easier in recent years. You no longer have to have your tax returns in front of you necessarily. You can import them from the IRS electronically by clicking some buttons, but it is still harder than it needs to be. So going forward in 1.5 years for the academic year 23-24, That's the FAFSA that people will start filling out on October 1, 2022. So I guess today's high school sophomores, today's 10th graders will have this experience that their older brothers and sisters didn't have, which is a FAFSA that will be considerably simpler. This was just passed into law at the end of last year in Washington, D.C. And it will, for instance, directly connect to the IRS so that there will no longer have to be, what did you tell the IRS your income is, or what did your employer, W-2, tell your IRS your income is. It's going to be in the FAFSA right away. And so that will help a lot of people, because that's the biggest sets of questions on the FAFSA. And for low-income families, it's a fairly simple number. They don't have to go find paperwork. In the future, that will be even easier. It also is going to have a different need calculation for federal need-based aid that will be much more predictable. There will be, you can know right up front, even before someone fills out a FAFSA, what their Pell Grant, that's the federal need-based aid for low and moderate income students to pay for some of college tuition costs and other costs. And so the Pell Grant will be more accessible and more people will get higher Pell Grant amounts. So that's the future of the FAFSA. But for now, there is an enormous effort we have to do. It has gotten harder with remote school, with COVID-19, with the inability to, again, look over someone's shoulder and give them one-on-one personal advice, which we've been doing at our agency, and now we're having to do it through electronic. It's just, through Zoom. It's not as easy. But we've got to redouble our efforts, and we're in partnership with high schools and with community groups to try to get the word out.
That's really helpful. And for our audience members, please do submit your questions as we go along. We'd love to make sure you get your questions answered. Demaine and Candace, I guess that's one of the questions I want to bring this back to you now. Coming from Chicago, I used to work for Chicago Public Schools. We made completing FAFSA a graduation requirement. And obviously there were some exemptions for that, particularly if you're an undocumented student or didn't have social security number, et cetera. But it was one of our ways, and certainly FAFSA completion had a pretty big uptick as a result of that. Curious to hear from both of you about the kind of strategies and tactics, or even some of the challenges that you try to address as you work with families and students in completing the FAFSA or otherwise understanding what financial aid is available to them. Demaine, maybe we'll start with you, and then Candace, would love to have you build on that.
Yeah, thank you, Dakota. So in my position, I'd supervised the counseling department, which deals primarily with exactly what you're talking about, the FAFSA. And one of the ways that we were able to get our number of students, completing the FAFSA was like we would host parental workshops, because one of the issues that we found was that the information that David was referring to, the tax documentation, all of the supplemental information that had to be supplied by the parents, students weren't receiving it in a timely fashion. So time would go on, and then as the pool of money depletes, then it's less money that's out there that the students can actually account for. So one way we worked around that is we did a lot of workshops at the beginning of the school year with our senior population and with our parents, with our students, and we continued that at least for the first quarter of the year up until December, and then we continued on throughout. And that did have an impact. I actually love the idea of making it a requirement. I'm going to take that back to our superintendent. I don't know if he's going to go for it, but
it's highly politically sensitive. Just you're going to be inside. I'm just warning you.
Yeah, but I think that would definitely make an impact on the number of students that are actually completing the form. But that's one way that we dealt with it. We just shared the information. Financial literacy, I think that's one key area that we have to stress in our environment is financial literacy and the potential upside to attending college.
Yeah, my experience is pretty similar. In the high school, they fill out the FAFSA. We require students to fill out the CUNY application. And so to apply to college, you have to fill out a FAFSA. But you actually made a point about less low-income students going back to school. And I think I can also draw a parallel to FAFSA completion for that, because my team does help our older students, our continuing students, with their FAFSA completion, and that COVID notwithstanding is an area that we witness significant drop off. It's easy to get a first year student to do those things that they're excited about. They have no grades, they haven't had a bad experience. College is shiny and new to them. But when you have an older student who may have gotten an F or had a bad experience or isn't enamored with the idea of college anymore, getting that older student to fill out the FAFSA can be a bigger challenge. And so that's something that we face as well. Is getting the continuing students to fill out the FAFSA. But also to your point too about less low income people going back to school, because that did get sort of my wheels turning, because that is something that my team and I have been discussing a lot of. And like, as I said, like, college is an experience. People want to be on campus, they want to be in the mix, they want to go to parties, they want to experience new things. And if you are a low income student and going to college was already a struggle for you and your family, and you're just sort of phoning it in on Zoom call, you don't necessarily see the benefit, and the ROI is significantly less. So if I can work, if I can get a job, if I can contribute to my household, and maybe go back, that is the common sort of theme that we're hearing from a lot of our low-income students that have determined that they don't want to go back to school. I just worry about the long-term impact, because our higher SES students are continuing. It's not an option for them. Like, you will go to Zoom school, you will go, right? And so some of our students don't have that same parental or familial push at home. So I wonder about the long-term sort of impact of COVID, coupled with the financial strain already on low-income students and them opting not to return back to college, like what that's going to look like long-term.
Yeah, if I can, I just want to pick up, Dakota, on a point you made about the undocumented students. I mean, obviously, pushing people to complete the FAFSA is crucial, because that way they might find out how much they could get to pay for college, and that may also explain, Candace, some of those renewals. They already saw what they got that first year, so you can't like say to them, this is going to give you huge amounts of money. They already know how much of a struggle it was, and from year to year, the FAFSA is going to usually get you about the same amount of money each year, which is more than many people know about, but it's still, in many cases, not enough. But we do in New Jersey, since 2018, under Governor Murphy, have an expansion of financial aid, state-paid financial aid, for help pay for college for undocumented students who went to New Jersey high schools, spent at least 3 years in a New Jersey high school, and graduated with a high school degree. And that is a population that doesn't get federal aid. College is less affordable for them, but at least we've made it more affordable with some state aid. And so we actually don't want them filling out a FAFSA, because that goes to the federal government, and that's not a good idea. Those students should be filling out, we have a separate application that mimics the FAFSA. It's a state alternative application for financial aid that just goes to the state, doesn't go to the federal government. And so we've worked very hard with all kinds of community groups to get the word out about that opportunity for what we call New Jersey Dreamers, those undocumented students who grew up here. This is the only state they've ever known in most cases, and the only country they've ever known, and went to our high schools. We've already invested in them, so let's let them go to college and make it more affordable. That can be one barrier as well. People don't want to fill out FAFSAs because they're afraid of who's getting that information. So we have to overcome that barrier. But no, it is. We are seeing renewals is a big issue with us. We are working very hard with the college financial aid departments, because they know who's on campus now, and reaching out to them really every week and reminding them that they've got to fill out the FAFSA again for next year. With August, when next semester starts, next year starts in August or September, it's around the corner. They need to fill out those FAFSAs for state aid by April. So that's a huge push for us right now.
No, it's thank you for bringing that up. And I think one thing that everyone can walk away from today's conversation with is that if you know somebody who is about to enter post-secondary or is currently in college, encourage them to fill out their FAFSA and remind them that there are supports there, even if they don't think that there are, supports for undocumented students. And as well, Candace, to your point, I think a lot about adult students. We know today's college student isn't the, typical 18-year-old going straight into college anymore. Yes, those are important populations, but we have a whole heck of a lot more adult students, people coming back for retraining, et cetera. And a lot of people fill in the gaps and assume that they are uneligible or there wouldn't be money for them. So I think the clear message I'm getting from you all is, hey, everybody, go out, pursue the resources and funding that's available to you. I do want to transition just a little bit. We're getting some great questions coming in from the audience, so thanks everybody. And actually, one audience member completely anticipated where I was going next. So kudos to anonymous attendee for your awesome telepathic abilities here. Natalie, I want to turn to you. So certainly, financial aid, money, is oftentimes listed as one of the biggest barriers for students in terms of their success. But it's not the only one by any stretch of the imagination. And we've talked about some of those other pieces. We've talked about the importance of navigators. We've talked about the importance of self. Candace brought up or mentioned the imposter syndrome before, but there are other kind of infrastructure things. There's a great book by some of my old colleagues at Lumina called, Are You a Student? Are you a college ready? Oh gosh, Are You a Student Ready College? See, I was going to flip that up. It's a fantastic book. So could you talk a little bit about how colleges are or are not designed to support low-income students, first-gen students? And I think one way, just to give you another tendril to tap onto if you want to, is, obviously the CUNY Edge program is clearly filling a need that the institution doesn't fill automatically. So I think there's another kind of conversation to be said there about the way the CUNY Edge program tries to supplement and support in areas that colleges don't. So give us a sense as an insider here about some of the infrastructure issues that colleges have in place that do and do not necessarily support low-income students.
Sure. There's so much there. I'll work a little backwards to say what CUNY Edge does, because it'll give you a sense of what gaps we're trying to fill, right? And so we have a phenomenal team of nearly 90 people who actively work to build rapport with individual students. Candace made the point earlier that low income is not a monolith. And I think that is something that's lost once students enter higher ed. Students are not a monolith, whether you are identifying as Black, Afro-Latina, like myself, Latino, Latinx, and beyond. The BIPOC community itself is not a monolith. And so that we have students who bring all of their successes and their excitement and their joy and preparedness to be great in college. And they get there and they meet sometimes a lackluster representative of the university, of the institution. And so your first block is, well, talking to financial aid is really hard. Or the bursar's office is not getting back to my emails, especially now in a remote setting. We also know that students are experiencing food scarcity, right? We know that our students are balancing too many responsibilities. And it's prior to COVID, we weren't necessarily transparent in acknowledging that we know students balance priorities and therefore adjust the way we teach. But now COVID has forced us into this distance work, remote learning space where we have to understand, can you have asynchronous learning to account for students who are caring for children, caring for adults, who are working, who need to be out of the home, right? So we are recognizing that connecting students to resources is really important, and college in and of itself doesn't necessarily do that. Hence why you have programs like CUNY Edge, ASAP, CD, CLIP for students who are learning second language. They meet the need, I think, as an offshoot of the college. So we represent, right, CUNY. I wouldn't say that CUNY isn't meeting the needs of students, but we have to be dynamic the way we do that, right? So different programs fill different needs.
That's really helpful. To continue with you just a little bit, we have another question talking about utilizing data to kind of drive better outcomes and what we're learning from that data. So, I mean, obviously, I'm sitting on the panel here with 4 people representing 4 organizations that I know are data rich. So Natalie, sticking with you, as you think through the kind of data that you're collecting and using to inform your program, what sticks out? What data points are you monitoring? And then also, what are you learning about what are actually some of the most challenging, what are some of the challenges that students are facing based on the data, how it plays out?
Sure. Well, in the last year, I can tell you that CUNY's done a student tech survey, a distance learning survey. CUNY Edge has done a fall and spring survey. So we have a lot of information. We're understanding that students, I think the umbrella is that they're juggling too much, and there doesn't seem to be any specific place to go for help. And that in and of itself is frustrating. And so I think one major element that we learned this year is that colleges were not necessarily prepared to pivot for COVID, right? And so students feeling unseen has led to students not coming back, has led to students dropping out. And so, actually, can you repeat the latter part of your question? I want to make sure I touch on it specifically.
Yeah, I was just curious about what some of the data is telling you about some of the barriers that students are facing.
Sure.
So you've already mentioned not knowing where to go to maybe plug into some resources.
Sure. Another is access to technology or lack thereof. Hard to follow class schedules are actually a structural issue in the sense that we very, very early on realized that the faculty were not prepared to do distance learning or distance teaching. And so over the summer, the School of Professional Study provided a crash course for CUNY faculty in order to be prepared to meet the need for the fall. And so in those ways, I think that the practical applications of the institution and using your own internal resources to prepare your team to best serve students is one of the nice pivots that I've been seeing. In addition, I think that financial aid was mentioned already, but I want to talk about how that is experienced by students. And so we have students who may be one class away from graduating, but they've run out of aid. What does a college do to support that student? We have students who have used their financial aid in other institutions or for other majors. And so that they're kind of restarting, but they feel very frustrated in that they don't know or felt that they weren't guided correctly in order to make the right decisions to maximize the use of their financial aid. And so a part of what we have to do now as support programs is to reallocate resources, do some of the heavy lifting for students to present them with a new set of options so that they can move forward, as opposed to feeling that dropping out of college is their only option.
Colleagues, would you add anything to the really great list that Natalie has put out?
Yeah, I would add, in a general sense, right? Like if you're talking about low-income students, there's an access issue and there's a preparation issue. So it could be a school quality issue that leads into the academic experience that you're going to have, but it could just be the things that you were around growing up. Like if you've never been on a yacht, you've never been on a plane, you've never been, some of these extreme examples, right, of like wealthy classmates, and you're trying to fit in, you don't know what you don't know. And there's a language of college. On campuses that I've worked on, we've actually given out a guide of like, this is what this acronym means, and this is what these 3 letters on this building means, because people are walking around blind. And so if you already feel like you're at a disadvantage, like that's what a lot of the data that I collect from my students says. It's like, what can you do to help bridge that gap for me so that I already feel like an outsider, right? I'm on this campus, if I'm a person of color and I'm low income, that was built by my ancestors. So I'm already, feeling the pull of that. And then I'm on this campus and no one's speaking to me, no one speaks my language. I just want some food with some flavor in the dining hall, and all I'm getting is, bland cheeseburgers. Like, somebody help me out here. And so I think that is a large experience that a lot of our students have, just to build off a little bit of what Natalie already outlined.
And I want to pivot on that, Candace, in addition to when they're on that campus, before they get to that campus, students, especially first-generation students, first in their family to go to college, the lingo of financial aid, the lingo of college about money is like literally a foreign language. It's still a foreign language to me, and I do this for a living. I believe it was Natalie used the term bursar. The word bursar does not exist anywhere except in colleges. That's the finance office. That's the place where you pay your bills. Like, you could call it the place where you pay your bills, or the bill office, or you could call it a lot of things other than bursar. I would propose modestly that we eliminate the word bursar from every college campus. It would help a lot of students. Another good example in our world of financial aid is work study. Now, work study is when the college gives you a job to help you pay for college. No one knows what work study means. That is a foreign language. Another one, which is, even, less obvious and doesn't apply to all colleges, but there's this term room and board. Food and housing is a pretty good synonym for room and board, and food and housing is in English. Room and board is not. Or maybe that's Old English, I guess, back when bed and board sounds like something from England in the 17th century. Room and board, bursar, work study, you could probably come up with 5 other examples. This is alienating. This is disempowering to young people thinking, or any people coming back to college, as Dakota mentioned, today's students, non-traditional age students. We otherize, higher ed by using these kinds of words. So, I mean, it's not the most important thing to do, but it is something we can do.
I love that point, David, in part because I think the best student support programs almost serve like a decoder ring. You remove the red tape, you remove the barrier, you get a student from point A to point B so that, 1, they understand, but 2, feel empowered to continue independent of your program. And as soon as we can start to demystify what some of these terms mean and some of these forms that you have to figure out, the sooner we promote this sense of belonging. So you as a student, whether you're low income or not, Black or brown or not, you belong in our institution. We're glad to have you here. Look how easy we've made it for you to join us. And that's a part of what's still missing, I think.
I just wanted to add one other piece to that. So there's an old saying, right? You build them strong so you don't have to repair them later on. That's something along those lines. And one of the things that I've noticed in terms of data collection, as students are entering the 9-12, which is the latter part of their K-12, our surveys show that I would say over 50% of them never engage in conversations about post-grad, about higher ed. And the conversation starts at 9th grade, which is, in my opinion, too late, right? That is, in terms of controlling the narrative and going back to my point about exposure, the earlier that we can expose our students to this concept of higher ed and, all of the benefits, so on and so forth, I think the outcome will be much more beneficial, especially when they get to that next level. So I think that's where our energy, collectively speaking, if that's where our energy and focus could be centered. And I think that's what we're trying to do at the K-12 level in different ways. But I think that there's needs to be a more intentional look of how to strengthen our students from the beginning. Hopefully, even as early as the intermediate, so 6 to 8. Having college students come in to mentor our students, or even having a dialogue, having some type of, now that we're virtual, having them do virtual Q&A sessions with the 8th graders, even and answering, allow the students to come up with the questions, because to make it more engaging and impactful, but at least allow them to plant that seed of what comes next, as opposed to waiting until senior year, they have the grades, they may or may not understand the financial system, how it works, but then they manage to get into a college of their choice, but then over the summer, they, for whatever reason, don't follow through and end up not coming, or they'll get through their first year and, don't continue. I think the key is starting that conversation as early as we possibly can to get them exposed.
This has been a fantastic conversation. And one of the things I appreciate about this panel here is it certainly strikes one of the principles I have, which is about concurrency, right? Because Demaine, I love the kind of phrase that you laid out there. One of my favorites is, we are always making students stronger for a system that we're unwilling to change. And so what we're hearing here is we have folks on this call right here, this panel, that are hyper-focused on strengthening our students as much as possible. Let's give them the decoder rings. Let's make sure they complete all these steps. Let's give them a navigator. Natalie mentioned one of the barriers right now is technology and access to technology. Let's, there's all these hotspots and and all these things pouring in, not enough, but still pouring in. And that's a great thing. At the same time, we're still trying to focus on the system. Let's get rid of the word bursar. I'm right there with you, David. I mean, come on, like what an easy fix we could all make and get behind. And behind that kind of idea and that kind of thinking about relabeling, restructuring the way our policies and our systems actually work, it really embraces that idea of concurrency. You know, one of the questions that we're getting in is a little bit about, you know, like what are the most high impact things that we can be doing, or perhaps that each of you are doing to make sure people are actually succeeding in college? Because we are doing all this really great work to give them the resources they need, to give them these decoder rings, to give them the navigators. And yet we're still seeing, you know, many students, you know, leave or stop out before they have to go. So curious, maybe we can start again with Natalie. You know, big buck, you know, what's the big thing that you're like, yeah, this is the secret sauce. If I had to put you down on bring you to Vegas and put down a chip, where are we going?
Oh, buddy. If I had to drill down to one thing that we're doing is combating the sense of isolation. I think that when you feel alone in a large and complicated system, it's so much easier to think, well, I don't have to continue right now. I can come back later. And so we have this, you start to plant the seed of I can stop out, and it turns into I've dropped out, and it's harder to re-enter the system. And so we're making connections with students, not just between our staff and the student, but also building student communities, right? You have someone who understands where you're coming from, understands your dynamics, and you start to build this sense of together, we can probably get through this, right? Yes, we have adults, and to Candace's point earlier, we have all kinds of students in CUNY Edge and in CUNY ranging from below 18 up into their 40s and older. So we have students who need different kinds of supports. If you feel that someone is actually rooting for you, someone is here to help you get through the red tape, here to make sure that you get through at least semester to semester, I think that goes a long way to supporting the sense of hope and realizing of greatness that all of our students do have.
Candace, I'm bringing you to Vegas. Where are you putting down your chip?
So I say this with like all sincerity, but like harassment, right? So we do not leave our students alone. Once our students transition into my program, they're assigned to a college counselor. It's a 65-to-1 ratio. So it's a super small ratio. The counselor has weekly, if not daily touch points, depending on the student and their unique situation. We have a social services team that helps with their social emotional development. If they need counseling, they're all licensed clinical social workers. And we also, pre-COVID, were on campus. So all of our students signed FERPA waivers. FERPA, for those who don't know, is the law that governs student privacy. And so if Natalie is my student and Natalie won't answer the phone, that's cool. I have David, her professor's phone number. I'll just call David, right? And like that's what we do, because we know that if our student won't respond to us directly, if we've spoken to their professor, they're a little bit more inclined to answer the phone. So you really have to be sort of all hands on deck. Like one of the values of the Harlem Children's Zone is we are an army of love, and we absolutely are. Like we run toward the problem. Like I will send three college counselors to SUNY Fredonia if I hear that there is an issue with our students up there. Like I will send 3 counselors tomorrow, pre-COVID. But the point is, like that is the thing that works for us. It's sort of just throwing everything we can, everyone at a problem, and seeing what we can do to solve it for our students in conjunction with the student, right? Because we don't want to sort of create this sense of codependency, but absolutely. Because for our more well-resourced students, right, we know that their parents are calling the bursar's office and calling the school, and as a former student affairs administrator, I've spoken to hundreds of parents, right? But for my low-income students, they might have been scared, or they might have been intimidated, or they might have been afraid. And so if the parents are afraid, like they've got us to do that for them.
That's great. David, what is your big bet on how to, help students make sure they stick with it and actually succeed through higher ed?
Well, I want to say that the kinds of direct interventions, the kinds of mentoring and cajoling and even harassing that's just been described by Natalie and Candace is the most effective thing. Everyone who's ever looked at what it takes to really improve persistence, that is going to college from year to year to year, and completion, that is graduating, that's what it takes. What we view our role as, and what I put my bet on, because when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So what we do here in financial aid is try to give dollars to these students so that when the counselors are talking to them, they can bring them hope, because we can pay for not only the tuition costs of college, but also those non-tuition costs, food and housing and all kinds of life problems that come up that cost money. And to the extent that we can increase financial aid and make college more affordable, not just the direct costs, but the indirect costs, the costs of things other than the cost of the classes, it will help. Now, we actually have data on this now. With our state aid program, we have seen that two students, otherwise identical, same college, same program, same socioeconomic, everything, and literally just a few dollars away from each other in income. So one gets more and the other gets less because of our need-based aid. The extra $1,000 can make a huge difference in completion and in persistence, and even bigger in graduation. And so you can see that if we invest just a little bit more in these students, more of them will graduate. That is an investment that pays off not only for those students and their families, but for all of us, because we have more people who finish and get this degree, which is so important for the economy, for the jobs, and really for their lives, for them to be productive members of society. So I will continue to put my bet on this money to help the students so that the counselors can give them hope.
And we're really grateful you're in that role, because we need you there. Demaine, what is your big strategy that helps students stay on track?
Okay, I wholeheartedly 100% believe the problem of practice is character development. All right, and we start that early so that we can know what to do with all of the resources that our panelists previously suggested. First, teaching them how to be perseverant, right? What is this concept of grit? What is tenacity? What is persistence? Knowing how to subscribe to a narrative. Even the term low income, right, has a certain paradigm that's attached to it that, a lot of time you have to overcome. I grew up and I would have been considered low income, right? It was a single parent household. My mom probably made close to 20 something or even less than that, growing up in the early 1990s. I often joke with people that, when I graduated high school, it was the only time where I was proud to be poor, because so many financial, assistance came forward because of it. But I had the foundation. I had the grades, but I also had the mentality that no matter what room I go in, right, no matter what room I enter, I'm going to sit back and I'm going to belong. I'm not going to feel like I don't. But that's a mindset that we have to instill in our young people as soon as we possibly can, because even I've had situations where what is that statement? You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, right? So I've had students with remarkable talent, but when you place these resources in front of them, because of their sense of self, their understanding of self is not firm. They have no clue what to do with it. So I sincerely believe that the earlier we focus on character development and building strong people to kind of deal with some of the challenges or the opportunities for growth, I'm going to say that comes along with the next level. It's not anything that they can't do.
That's great. So what we've heard is definitely some, character development. We've heard financial literacy. We've heard kind of empowering the self. We've also heard, the importance of navigators, a go-to person, someone to counsel me, help me, advise me to get through this system. And then, of course, the importance of funding more money, and how even seemingly small dollar amounts, when relative to a very large scale, can make a massive difference in people's lives. I want to say thank you to the audience. We're getting a lot of really great questions coming in. And in about 10 minutes, minutes, we're going to have a separate Q&A session that I'm going to burn through a lot of these really good ones. I mean, there's some really good ones in here, so I'm eager to get to them. Please continue to submit them. There'll be a Q&A session at around 7:15 or so. You know, real quick, before we turn it over back to Natasha briefly to hear a little bit more about ways that people, you know, joining us today can kind of lend their voice and talents to this system. I kind of want to just go back here. We have government, we have higher ed, we have K-12, and we have K-12 community organizing. I try not to label Harlan Children's Zone because it's in a class of its own, in my humble opinion. But anyway, what we don't have is the private sector. And one of the questions I wanted to throw out and toss really to anybody, you know, Candace, I know you do a lot of partnership development work through Harlan Children's Zone. Demain, I'm sure you work a lot with companies, et cetera. I'm sure you all do. Can you talk about the ways that the private sector companies, businesses can engage, and what role they should be playing in this conversation to make sure low-income students are successful? And Candace, I think I saw a registered movement of you coming off. So we'll let you go first.
I got it. I was scratching, but that's fine. So I think the important thing there is for the organizations to give you what you need and not what they want to give you. A lot of times companies want to give you sort of something that makes them feel good, or they can put on their website like, hey, we helped CUNY Edge, like we're so amazing, but they donated you laptops that were 10 years old that you didn't need anyway. So I think that a lot of organizations, small and large, have a problem being brutally honest about the things that they need from a company. So if you have realized that your students are having a real preparation issue with public speaking, ask a company to teach them how to do public speaking. If you need a good or service, like for the holidays, we get toys donated because our population needs Christmas gifts to give to their children or holiday gifts to give to their children. So we ask for physical goods. But I think it's also keeping the sort of conduit open. So if they are learning best practices in business that you can apply to your nonprofit, like being open to receiving that feedback from them as well, because that's something that can help you long term. But yeah, I think that working in development, I mean, I do a lot of development presentations. You sort of shake a lot of trees and sometimes nothing happens, but getting your name out, getting your mission out, maybe you are doing a stewardship for the field in general, and maybe your organization isn't the best fit, but somebody else comes in and that's the fit that the organization was looking for. So you're sort of doing goodwill for all mankind, while you're sort of trying to help promulgate the work, right? Because we're all in this together. So even if I don't get the dollars and somebody else does, like that's a win for me. So those are some of the approaches I take when working with development partners.
Demain, do you have anything to add? I know someone is very curious, in particular, how your school might be working with local companies. So I want to give you a chance.
Well, we work primarily with local universities and colleges, right? So we have programs that we partner with our local community colleges as well as our universities, such as Rutgers University, Newark, as well as New Brunswick, and also Seton Hall University. They have an Upward Bound program. And they basically work with the students throughout their high school career. In addition to that, we try to give students opportunities to partner with our local community organizations, such as our East Orange General Hospital. We've had students that would go and intern there to learn about the ins and outs, as well as get exposure to see if they would potentially go into the medical field moving on afterwards. Also providing a pipeline, a connection between our local government, our city hall. They often provide opportunities for our students as well. I try to serve in a supportive capacity. I work alongside a great team of administrators as well. I was fortunate to have one of my fellow administrators is a direct connect to our community base. So I funnel a lot of our community connections through her. That's Ms. Christina Jacquez. And so, it's just continuously keeping this village approach and ongoing, trying to foster those connections and foster those relationships. But the key thing is the vertical articulation and consistency. I think that is, one area that we try to spend a lot of time to make sure that nothing gets lost in translation. Or, if the administration changes, or if There's in our situation with COVID, we want to make sure that that those relationships are solid and pretty much unshakable.
Thank you both. I'm sorry, my dog's going crazy at the moment, so you're going to catch a little bit of Otis. What I do want to add one other thing, David. It looks like you want to get in here too, real quick.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on domain and exploring the medical field. So our tuition-free community college is beginning to be recognized by employers, including St. Barnabas, that this is a way, college is not just 18 to 22-year-olds. This is a way for their employees to upgrade their skills, go get some college courses, credentials, and degrees that will help them rise at work, that will help them advance, get better jobs, more money, and they can make this part of their human resources, part of their training of their own employees. And so they've embraced the Community College Opportunity Grant, the state program, as a way of encouraging people, look, you can go back to school, we can help you, get there, and the state is helping you get there. So that is an example of one employer, although many others are now talking about the fact that this is lifelong learning for their own employees, and that's a partnership that's crucial, because more than half of the students at this point in post-secondary are not 18 to 22, are different profile than that traditional 18 to 22-year-old. It's not traditional anymore because it's less than half. It's the majority now, or the other profile.
Yeah, really well put. And I couldn't agree more. It is. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Natalie. Keep jumping in.
That's fine. I really appreciated the question, because a big part of college is exposure, like Domain explained to us before. And I think ways that private institutions can help are to serve as areas of enrichment for our students. Students need that capital, right? To say that I had an internship here, or I worked there, to build their networks when it's time to look for jobs or to make connections. And so I don't think it's asking a lot for them private organizations to continue being themselves, but create a space for our students to participate as well, to join that community. And I think it goes a long way in terms of our post-college experience. It goes a long way towards increasing the average lifetime income of our individual students, and overall the prosperity of given communities when they have that access.
Yeah, so I'm definitely hearing private sector, we need you and we're ready for you. And oh, by the way, I'm just going to add a quick little plug. Tuition reimbursement by private industry results in a very high ROI. So if you are a company and you're looking at your professional development work, I will point you to several really good studies about the ROI. But touch me later. Get in touch with me later. All right. So we've been hearing a lot today about the issues, opportunities, the great work being done. But we know there's still a lot more to do, as Domain kind of put it, to keep this village together and keep using that idea. So a lot of you might be looking for ways to get involved and contribute to our forward progress. So I want to bring Natasha back in. And Natasha, maybe you can just share for a couple minutes here before we move on to the Q&A section about some ways that people can get involved today with the great work that Dorson's doing.
Yeah, well, thank you to everyone for being here tonight. This was a very imperative conversation. And as Dakota said, now what? I said it at our last panel. We're all attending these webinars, we're listening to podcasts, we're self-educating, we're staying engaged. But now what can you attendees actually do? So money, time, and resources, it's very simple. At Dorson, we're a local organization partnering with local schools to provide supplementary enrichment to ensure that the kind of youth that we spoke about today have the tools needed to remain on this pathway to higher education. Money, time, and resources are the three things needed to help keep organizations like Dorson alive, and are three simple things that are just a little bit of what underserved students need on their journeys to and through college. So money, it's an icky subject. We talked about it quite a bit on this panel. At Dorson, money and generous donations from supporters who similarly champion our mission is what allows us to continue working with local schools to serve these students. Our Dorson Enrichment Partners program is a monthly giving program where recurring donations opposed to one-time donations really enables us to have sustainable funding throughout the year. As a monthly supporter, you're providing us long-lasting support, you're building a relationship with our organization, and you're making a more impactful investment in our students. Everybody has their cause. For those of you who have made education your cause, I ask that you partner with Dorson and become an enrichment partner. Second area is time. Now, all nonprofits are always looking for pro bono volunteers. Since its inception, Dorson has been a volunteer-based organization, and I encourage you to donate your time and expertise to us. We need help with fundraising, program support, public relations. A massive way of getting involved in this movement is giving back in a meaningful, hands-on way through donating your time, skills, expertise to help us grow this organization and support more students. So I really encourage you to please visit our website, dorsoncommunity.org, contact us. Let's see how we can get you involved. And the third area of resources. Now, resources can range from tangible items like technological devices to support our students with remote learning, to intangibles like offering up yourself or your network to share connections, knowledge. You never know what value you may be able to provide a local organization like ours. And I again encourage you to reach out to us or any community organization wherever you may be located. Familiarize yourself with what their needs are and see how you can provide resources to help fit those needs. So those are just a few ways of getting involved. And I really just want to thank everyone for tuning in tonight. I hope this conversation really inspired you to support this greater mission to empower underserved youth wherever you may be located. And I definitely welcome you to join Dorson in this mission. And I look forward to your support and involvement. Thank you.
Thanks, Natasha. And I just, yes, and, folks, like there's some research that says that people need 7 interactions before they sign up to volunteer for something. So let's cut that down. Hopefully this is your second time on our panel. Send that email, visit dorsoncommunity.org, find ways to get involved. It really does take a village, like Domain shared, and we need you. You're part of that village. So thank you, Natasha, and thanks everyone. All right, we have roughly 10 minutes, 10 and a half minutes to get through a lot of really good questions. I'm going to try to rapid fire this as much as possible. David, I'm coming your way first with 2 questions. One comes about, you mentioned earlier about the future of FAFSA being a bit easier, some great modifications coming. Questions about, is that going to apply also to the verification process? For those who are unfamiliar, students get flagged for verification where they have to kind of reaffirm or send in additional documents. There's all these different steps to, it's vast. And so that can be a barrier to students. So there's a question about whether or not that's also being having some positive changes. The second question is the New Jersey program making community college as close to free as possible for low-income students expandable to help them to complete their bachelor's degree for free as well? So David, I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, 2 quick answers. The first answer is yes, that future FAFSA will dramatically reduce the amount of need to put students into income verification. Usually income verification now is because they said one thing perhaps to the IRS and maybe said something different on the FAFSA or forgot or they got the years wrong. That can't happen when the IRS is going to directly populate the FAFSA. Starting in, say it again, 2023, 2024, that will be a lot better because they've shown that when low-income students who would otherwise get financial aid, significant financial aid, get caught up in verification, some of them never get through. They have to go find documents that they can't find. They have to scan them and upload them. It's just not easy. And so we're going to dramatically reduce verification, which will help more students get the aid they need and get through to and through college. As far as the state's program, right now it's community college. That is the first 2-year gateway to a bachelor's degree. We encourage people to use the free 2 years and then transfer. And New Jersey does have a strong process to make sure that transfers happen between our 2-year community colleges, our county colleges, and 4-year schools in the state of New Jersey. But Governor Murphy a year ago proposed in a budget that obviously got sidetracked by the coronavirus pandemic. But he did propose expanding this in a Garden State Guarantee program that would use that same principle of 2 years so that you have a 4-year pathway to tuition free, 2 years at a community college and 2 years at a public 4-year institution. That hasn't happened yet, but it is absolutely one of the ideas that is floating around there and that the governor has expressed strong support for if we can make it happen in this time of scarcity. But it is something that we're definitely working on.
Excellent, thank you. This next one comes from Mag. Mag is asking, isn't it essential to educate parents on financial aid since their students and children continually turn to them and get turned off when their parents don't know? Are there closer linkages and referrals to organizations that help students and their parents be part of the financial aid process? Anyone want to take that away? I saw a lot of head nods, so clearly we have some expertise in the room.
Well, I'm happy to go first quickly. Parents are the largest audience for the events that we do at 600 events a year at high schools and community-based organizations to talk about financial aid. I mean, those are financial aid nights, they're often called. Prior to COVID, when everything was in person, they would often look like, 6 to 7, 6 to 8 p.m. on a weekday night at a high school auditorium or something like that all over this state. And we do 600 plus of those a year. The audience is parents. That's who's in that audience. And it is absolutely crucial to expand that reach because, look, that's a self-selected group. That's who decides to come out. Now they can do it on Zoom, and we may actually be reaching more people because, you could multitask. You could maybe be doing one or two things and listening with half an ear to our presentation on financial aid. That's better than zero. But still, we are only reaching those who voluntarily sign up. So efforts to find people and give them this information even when they don't think they need it is what we partner with community groups to do because it's so important.
Yes, to parents. Oh, go ahead.
So I just wanted to add to that. Essentially, you have the guy here, David, right in front of you. So one thing that we ask is that at the campus we ask for you to, as a parent, to reach out to your school counselor because they are constantly working to provide you with information and resources. And we often do also parent nights on a local level. But when you are looking for the straight from the source, we also subscribe to those different workshop that David is referring to. So that's one key area you can get a lot of information.
I was going to say, yes, we do involve parents. And the other thing we do to illuminate the financial aspect of college is provide students what the actual cost of attending like their top 3 schools will be on paper using the financial aid information from their FAFSA so that they can make a comprehensive financial decision and not just the sticker price of tuition and room and board and those kinds of things.
Great responses, great responses. So this next one is a quick idea, and I'm going to speak it out into the world. And maybe this is a great thing for Dorset to provide or volunteer. Lisa was asking, is there a way that we can provide talking points for other groups that mentor young people to help them support in their college journey? And I just want to flag, in Cincinnati, they did this. They did a great experiment where they worked with daycare centers, and they are particularly targeting and trying to support single female heads of household to get back into post-secondary education. So they equip daycares, for example, with information. So I'm speaking that out to the world. Panelists, don't worry, you're off the hook for this one unless you have a great talking point or primer. Send that around. But yes, that's a great idea, Lisa. Thank you for sharing that. One of the other questions we have here, and I've been kind of saving some of the complicated ones because there are really good thorny questions in here, folks. One of them is that, we've talked about a lot of the challenges, but, one of the things we haven't really talked too much about is like, how do we just help students address some of the basic needs? We've talked about the developing of self. We've talked about financial aid for college. We've talked about the importance of navigators, but a navigator is great, but if I can't afford housing, if I can't afford food, that's a challenge. So, I guess I'm thinking maybe Candace and Natalie, you might have some ideas about how you are working to support students who might need basic needs assistance, and what that might inform about what other groups and other folks can do, or what we might want to advocate for as a collective society to make, basic needs, a standard rather than an acute need. Natalie, do you want to take a chip at that first?
Sure. So we unfortunately have to work day to day to help students who live in the shelter system, students who have borrowed laptops but are worried about any fees that they might incur if someone steals their laptop or damages it because it's their responsibility. We have students who are worried about eating while trying to do their job and helping share a laptop with their child who's in school. So I think one of the really important ways is to come together as professionals to figure out where the gaps are. The fact that we have students in college who are homeless is appalling, right? They're on their behalf or directly out of pocket. Money is being paid to an institution to essentially ensure their future through education, but at the moment, their current existence is somewhat of a non-issue, right? So how do we get students the support that they need? We specifically try to bridge the gap between the student's experience and those directly responsible for that. So whenever there is a case issue, our navigators connect directly with the Human Resource Administration to make sure that students' cases are reopened as quickly as possible, to make sure that we can relocate them to places where HRA monies can be used towards rent, or to make sure that they're more or less stable. Situations change day to day, to be honest. And so, the idea of a semester is a few months long, but as a student who's facing these severe challenges, getting from one day to the next can seem like too big of a challenge, almost insurmountable. And so for us, it's been really important to create a network where we try to catch students before the point of no return, in the sense that they stop communicating with us. And whether that's reaching out to create relationships with other departments on campus, whether it's the wellness office, the women's center, other nonprofits, it's super important for us to develop the rapport enough with a student for them to confide in us with what they need so that we can address it as quickly as possible.
Candace, do you have anything to add in 30 seconds?
Quickly, we mail our students care packages with basic toiletries, deodorant, toothpaste, things that they wouldn't think to buy or wouldn't want to spend their own money on. For our students that are local, we have sort of like a closet of resources, from hygiene products to gift cards to whatever they may need to feed themselves or take care of themselves for a day. And then we have sort of the places where our students are centrally located, lists of community resources, including those campuses that have food pantries or free food closets, so that if our students aren't local, then they sort of know where to go in those communities.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. And for those who are following, David has also put a resource in the chat to help provide some talking points. So David, thank you for helping us solve and bring that idea into fruition. Lisa, there you go. Well, folks, it is 7:30. We're at time. We have so many other great questions that are deserving of future events. We'll store those, we'll keep those, we'll wrestle with those. I'm not promising to answer them, but we might address them on future conversations. As we wrap up today, I want to make sure we thank each of our panelists, Natalie, David, Demaine, and Candace. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and your time, your expertise with us. A big thanks to Eloise and Nate for their masterful behind the scenes coordination. And of course, to the Dorset Community Foundation for hosting today's event. Our biggest thanks, though, goes to you, the attendee, for being here, for spending some time in your evening with us. We really do appreciate it. As we discussed today, it's not a single thing, it's a systems thing. And it's not just a matter of more money, and it's not just a matter of more tutoring, and it's not just a matter of more self-confidence building. It's all of these things and much, much more. And it's the system that binds all these things and people together. You are fortunate to have system builders in your community right here, convened by the Dorset Community Foundation. And take my word for it, friends, there are not system builders in every community in every county around the country. My job is to go out and find systems builders in this world and support them. There's a reason I'm here today, and that's why. I hope that you add your voice, your talent, your resources, and your time to making your community a better place to live. Please check out dorsetcommunity.org. And thank you so much for being with us and for joining us today. Be safe, be healthy, mask up, and have a wonderful night, everybody. Thank you so much for being here.